All right, so today our group one, we're Ford Motor Company. My name is Satir Jovis.
Craig Bennett.
Alex Priebus.
And Noah Marshall.
And today we're going to present you with Ford Motor Company.
So a little bit about Ford's history. Ford was started in 1903 by Henry Ford, along with 12 other investors to create horseless carriages. Ford is located currently in Michigan. They also have 62 plants around the world, employing over 187,000 employees. Ford is the fourth largest automobile manufacturer in the world, and Ford was a part of the big three car companies, consisted of Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. So Ford's mission statement is to make people's lives better by making mobility accessible and affordable. And I thought this was a pretty good mission statement, and it focused on moving people, which is a basic function expected in automobiles and the transportation sector. And therefore, there is also an emphasis on mobility and indicates the purpose of Ford's business in our society. Next is their vision statement. The vision statement is to become the world's most trusted company, designing smart vehicles for a smart world. I thought this was also a good vision statement, and it reflects the multinational company's strategic goal of becoming a leader in the automotive industry. Ford also focused on smart vehicles, and it's pertinent to the current market conditions and the customers' preferences. The company aims to maximize its profitability and relevance to the market where more efficient technologies are preferred. Some other strategic challenges Ford is facing: they've had weak earnings. They've also had to do restructuring costs. The guidance hasn't been there. They've also had weak sales, and then unions. There were union talks about going on strike.
Yeah, so let's talk about environmental scanning and monitoring. External scanning that Ford has to do, that they've been doing, honestly, involves the electric car industry, like Tesla, trying to aim at those electric engineering, because that's ultimately the future by 2025. Now these companies are really trying to evolve environmentally and gas production. These are critical trends that are happening as more and more people hunt for a consumer-friendly electric vehicle, obviously while being stylish, trendy, etc. External monitoring that Ford must conduct is to track the evolution of electric charging stations, like placing them in mass quantities across the country, like gas stations are currently implemented. Software for these cars, like self-driving, anything that you can just download on your phone and implement, and overall cost of production. So for the SWOT analysis, for the next slide, the biggest Ford strengths are their brand value, for sure. A valuable brand is one of the greatest assets of any organization, and Ford definitely scores big in this respect. The Ford brand is globally recognized for its product line of futuristic innovations that set the company apart. They got a brand value of $11.21 billion as of 2019. They got a global dealership network, loyal customer following. I mean, everybody knows Ford. The Ford brand is one of the most valuable on the planet. Now, they got some weaknesses for sure, like Alex was mentioning. But on top of all those things, they got a weak reputation. They got, at least comparing it to some of their peers, Ford cars, especially like the luxury brand Lincoln, they are pretty lacking in quality compared to like General Motors, Toyotas. I mean, you can see it in like Volvos, some of these cars where they last for years and years, but I know people personally who, they can drive Fords for, a few years, and then next thing you know, they're having problems left and right. United States dependency, I mean, as the largest shares of Ford sales come from the U.S., I mean, that limits their market share and profitability, like Alex again was mentioning. I mean, that's why they're scrambling to find any sort of sales and revenue. So to continue that SWOT analysis, some opportunities for Ford, scope for global expansion is a big one. You got high demands for vehicles, emerging markets, like in China, India, the populations are soaring. And same with this group. I mean, these individuals are, they're getting more and more middle class. They're able to afford these types of vehicles. So I think Ford, I mean, that is the scope that they need to look forward to. Got large numbers of demand. I know Tesla is definitely aiming at, they just built a gigafactory over there near Shanghai. So I think they got to step up on the gas with that one. Autonomous driving technology. Ford has already invested heavily in developing driverless cars. Such cars are expected to reduce the number of road accidents, improve traffic conditions. At most auto manufacturers such as Volkswagen, Tesla Motors, like I already mentioned, they're racing to adapt this technology. They got to get there, or else they're going to be lacking and blown to the wind, and nobody's going to be really mentioning Ford when it comes to that then. But hopefully, they're saying by 2021, which obviously with coronavirus, you don't know yet, they might have to adjust those numbers by a year or so. But they're hoping to get fully autonomous cars by then, without 2021. Some threats, intense competition for sure. I mean, they have more and more players entering the global automotive market like Tesla. Ford may find itself struggling to maintain a steady customer base with more options to the consumer. We got cut through competition among automakers, like we said before, but only expected to increase. Ford must be ready to face off with other global brands. Competitive advantage. There are some factors that add up to the Ford's competitive advantage and makes them stand out regardless of the competition and attempts for Ford to grow each year. One of these factors is how Ford constantly is improving strategies and bringing innovation in the industry. For instance, I mean, the introduction of smart cars that function in terms of fuel efficiency. I mean, they were the first to be eco-smart and really advertise that, in the early 2010s for sure, coming out of the financial crisis. That was a big, at least growing up, I saw a lot of commercials with them. It helps us to provide as consumers with the products that those are not harmful to the environment in any way. Obviously, electric cars, Tesla, we're going to keep saying Tesla because that's, definitely one of their biggest, watchdogs that you got to watch out for. But Ford Motors plays their part in saving the environment through production of such cars. In terms of internal strategies, Ford implemented a centralized decision-making strategy that worked for them really well and has paid the company off in terms of improvements in all aspects of the company. Has helped Ford to provide better products to its customers. Now the VRIN, I grew up going VRIO, the VRIO framework, but I was just going to do VRIN as we learned in class. The VRIO framework is used to help determine where a firm may have a competitive advantage. So this framework specifically evaluates both resources, capabilities, and core competencies of the firm. So the four components of the VRIO analysis include value, rare, imitability, and organization. So the key drivers of success for Ford when focusing on both these frameworks, it's got to be the brand. Again, like I mentioned earlier, 111 years of experience, a strong reputation. Everybody knows this brand. I mean, pricing power, the suppliers. I mean, you mentioned Ford with any other company. I mean, they're, everybody's going to know them. The one thing that many people don't know about is their up and coming corporate culture. The one thing that this case really kind of dived in on looking at the book is One Ford. One Ford stands for one team, one plan, one goal. If you want to break it down, each one team is focused on improving global operations as measured by customers, employees, dealers, investors, suppliers, unions/councils, and community satisfaction. Definitely teamwork. I mean, that's obviously what you got to go. You got to build that to get to your goal, which is at the very end there. One plan, got to get there. I mean, restructure to operate profitability, accelerate development of new products, to improve financials. Again, back to what Alex was saying, financials are swimming in the deep end right now. So they got to fund that plan. And then obviously one goal is to deliver profitable growth for all. Social networking, how does over 110-year-old car manufacturer, it's the 5th largest in the world, remain relevant? You got to keep engaging and, approach in this digital age. But honestly, believe it or not, they are definitely a respected American corporation that is doing some excellent work. They're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I mean, you Google them and, they are advertising left and right. You go on the TV, boom, they're advertising the new Ford Escape or whatever car, So I'd say on top of all that, Ford even has their own social media network. I call it Ford Social. And Ford Social is the place for people who want to dig deep and discuss the latest tech, design, and stories behind Ford vehicles, which is directly on the website, which I have attached in the references on.
As far as the business level strategies go, Ford's generic strategy is cost leadership. They introduced the assembly line method, which allowed them to minimize costs and maximize productivity. This was a way to attract customers due to low and affordable prices. This strategy allows for business competitive advantage by bringing down the prices for Ford themselves and also being able to offer lower priced vehicles for people to be able to afford. However, by 1927, GM or General Motors used broad differentiation by offering a wider array of products. During that time, Americans were gaining higher wages and style and design were being valued more than just lower prices. Ford moved its generic strategy towards broad differentiation. Its current strategic objective is product innovation. As far as the corporate level strategies go, market penetration, Ford is using customer retention. So they're able to sell more Ford products to its current customers. And they're doing this by increasing the number of dealerships to increase sales volume throughout the US. Linked to Ford's generic competitive strategy, this emphasizes benefits of low cost and also increases differentiation to gain bigger market share. As far as the product development goes, Ford uses product development as their secondary strategy for growth. They offer new products to increase sales revenue, and their research and design investments are things such as like electric vehicles, like Satiri was mentioning. Ford is investing in the Ford Focus, so they're trying to keep up with the competition as far as the direction of electric vehicles go. As far as market development, Ford uses market development as a supportive strategy for their growth. They're already globally operated, so no new actions need to be taken to enter new industries or market segments for years now. As far as international strategies go, Ford has been struggling to maintain strong international strategies. In 2018, they lost $1.8 billion earnings before interest and taxes in the Asia Pacific market. This was due to that trade war between the US and China. And in the same year, they also lost $765 million earnings before interest and taxes in the European market due to the Brexit. Factors that are hurting Ford's revenue are things such as inflation, tariffs, currency movements, and exchange rates. Ford created an action plan to improve international strategies. Those strategies, they've broken up and divided into different areas around the world. In North America, they're refreshing 75% of their lineup over the next 2 years. They're also increasing the mix of SUVs so they can be more competitive with the market, since other companies such as Toyota, GM, they're introducing more and more SUVs since that's what the consumer is demanding. In the European market, they're actually known as the #1 selling commercial vehicle brand. They're improving and strengthening competitive position, and they're targeting vehicle lineup with an emphasis on 3 groups, which is going to be the commercial vehicles, passenger vehicles, and import vehicles. In China, they're trying to create a foundation with the right leaders and products. They're going to improve their cost structure and relationships with their partners. And they're going to be introducing 10 new Ford and Lincoln products in China this year. And they're trying to introduce more than 30 by the year 2021. In South America, they're staying committed to the region with an optimized footprint, and they're trying to reduce structural costs while improving efficiency.
As far as the entrepreneurship and competitive dynamics, this is one strategy that's always kind of hit close to home for Ford, just because when you talk about like the early 1900s, the invention of the assembly line, it's something that Ford's always had a firm ground on. So when it comes to innovation, that's kind of essential for any business, because if you're not growing, you're not coming up with new stuff, you're not growing. So for Ford, in recent years, something that we've seen is this giant investment of $25 billion actually into restructuring the company and trying to become the leader in truck and SUV production. So as of right now, Ford, they're starting to see a plateau in sales when it comes to their compact size vehicles, any sedans in general. Plus, in addition to this recent surge for customers demanding SUVs and trucks, Ford's seeing that. Plus, they're experiencing averages of 5% per year in sales growth for these classes of vehicle. So Ford's realizing this, and they're deciding that they want to spend less on those sedan types of vehicles and rather invest heavily into the SUVs and the trucks. On top of that, they also see a future where the autonomous vehicles and the electric vehicles, as we've mentioned before with Tesla, people are starting to want them. And as the technology gets better and better every year, it's becoming easier for companies like Ford and similar brands like the Chevys and the Toyotas of the world to produce these vehicles. So Ford realizes this, and their game plan is to get a head start over everyone else. They realize that they probably can't compete with the Teslas of the world, but if they can be first place when it comes to the average car producer, like the Toyotas, etc., Ford thinks that they're going to be putting themselves in a great position to compete in the years to come. Secondly, let's talk about the control systems, governance, and the ethics of the company. So one thing that we noticed with Ford is that they're trying to become the leaders in this industry when it comes to good practices and safety concerns and matters such as that. So as we were looking through the website, one thing that really stuck out was the fact that Ford really has clear principles for what they expect, all labeled out on the site. And that message is directed to each and every single employee. That includes Ford as well as the $100 billion supply chain that they've established over the years. This kind of touches on the whole point of the one Ford that Satiri brought up before. It's this whole idea that, it's this one large corporation spread out all across the world, but at the same time, it still is one brand, and they want to make sure that that message is relayed out there. So even when you talk about issues like child labor and, people not being paid and even forced labor, all this kind of stuff, Ford is, instead of turning their heads like a lot of corporations do, rather they're focused on fixing those problems and making sure that every single step of their supply chain is, it meets the standards, top to bottom. That brings us to the organizational structure of the company. So the way Ford is broken down is that they have 3 different regions spread out across the world. These are the North and South America, Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, and then the Asian Pacific market. So for Ford, they break it down as a traditional company where each of these regions have their own executives on top. And it's a top to bottom approach where commands get sent from the top. And then even the leaders of each one of these regions, they have their own boss, which would be the CEO of the company. So that's how it's broken down. Right now, Ford ranks as the second largest US-based automobile producer. And I mean, this kind of highlights the whole idea that their organization works, the structure is effective, because they rank so highly. And all of this is important because when we consider things like economic downturns, political instability, regulations, from local governments all the way to the European Union, for example, all this stuff presents potential risk. That's why it's important to have a firm structure, because if you don't, all of a sudden the Asian Pacific market could collapse, and that's 33% of your revenue that gets brought in. So obviously you want to avoid those types of issues by having a competent organization structure. So further on some of those points, we look at the the way it's really broken down. So the corporate hierarchy, like I was saying, it's a traditional setup where it goes top to bottom. We have middle managers who are in charge of car salesmen and the people who are building the actual car, stuff like that. They report to the middle managers, who then go to their bosses, who then go to these executive VPs. And, the end of the circle is the CEO, Jim Hackett, of the company. As we're saying, regional and geographic divisions. So we're talking about those Asia Pacific markets, the Africa market, all these different markets that really get broken down into the 3 different divisions. And then finally, global functional groups. And then the global functional groups. So that's, again, this whole idea that everything's really broken down into these 3 different regions. So then specifically in each of these regions, you've got issues such as labor affairs, global production, development, communications, accounting, all that kind of stuff. So it's like a traditional corporation, as we mentioned. All of this gets broken down, and then officials report to the hierarchy, and that's how it goes.
So next we're going to talk about what challenges the CEO, Jim Hackett, faced. He joined the company at a time when U.S. auto sales were declining for several months, and then increased Hackett's challenges and did not give him much room to experiment with new ideas. Ford had launched the F-Series Super Duty truck, and he thought it could help the economy boost its margins going forward. And that was because heavyweight vehicles such as trucks have higher profit margins than cars. Also, the U.S. demand for trucks and utility vehicles has outperformed the demand for cars in the last couple of years. In 2016, over 820,000 F-Series pickup trucks were sold in the United States with an increase of 5.2%. So next we're going to talk about how Jim Hackett spurred innovation. He reevaluated his revenue opportunities. With U.S. industry sales plateauing or falling, Hackett said Ford must look for new revenue opportunities and review areas where the company is not making money. Next is to evaluate the fitness of the company, and this means trying to figure out the best, most efficient way to operate the business, or making sure the process is being followed to create products. I was reading an article, and Hackett had said it's actually finding ways to design things so we don't have redundancy and overlap. Next is to reevaluated his capital development. Hackett wants to make sure Ford is making an acceptable return on its investments. And lastly, Jim Hackett wanted to renew his focus on innovation. Hackett wants to make sure the automaker is as focused as possible on becoming a leader on the development of autonomous vehicles and on emergent opportunities as a mobility service provider. So how is Ford fostering innovation? Ford's core tenets continue to be quality, safety, sustainability, and innovation. The company is going to continue Henry Ford's legacy, but now, instead of putting the world on wheels, Ford's aim is to create smart mobility. At the beginning of 2015, the company opened its research and innovation center in Palo Alto, California, in Silicon Valley. And in 2016, a new subsidiary, Ford Smart Mobility LLC, was formed to design, build, grow, and invest in emerging mobility technologies.
So this brings us to our recommendations for the firm. We've got 3 of them, and those would be to increase the investments into emerging markets around the world, continue the transition from car-focused into the leader of truck and SUV production, and then finally to take advantage of the shift in preference towards electric and autonomous vehicles. So the first one, increase investments into emerging markets. As we talked about earlier, Ford already dominates, or at least holds a large majority of share in the domestic market. However, there's so much potential outside the borders of the United States. And honestly, it's a great way for the company to make a ton of money. But at the same time, we really believe that Ford is one of those brands of America that is, it's very popular amongst the world, kind of like an Apple or a Budweiser. Ford is almost in that same sort of class. So it only makes sense that they would be able to go out beyond the United States borders and to have great success. The second recommendation, which was to continue the transition from car-focused into the leader of truck and SUV production. Like we said, this is what the people want, and there's no point in making products that aren't going to sell the way you want them to. So not to mention, truck and SUVs also cost more money. So in the addition to more revenue per unit sold, you're really taking advantage of a market that seems to be emerging and could result in great success for the company. And then finally, to take advantage of the shift in preference towards electric and autonomous vehicles. So the whole idea that self-driving cars and electric cars are just, something that sounds fun today, but deep down people want to drive it's a myth. Like, this technology is getting better every single year and it's not going to go anywhere. So we mentioned it's probably too late unless Ford really has an amazing game plan as far as catching up to Tesla. But realistically, what the company should be doing is making sure that they stay one step ahead of the Chevys and the Toyotas of the world, because this is something that isn't going away. So if they can get on board right now and dominate that market, Ford's going to be looking amazing 50 years from now. And that concludes our presentation. So we hope you enjoyed listening as much as we enjoyed looking up this company. But Ford is a fantastic company, as you have experienced, as we have over the last 20 minutes. And there's a lot of potential for it to even grow in the years to come.